Okay, so this is the first one that I'm gonna show you, which is the math is fun. So what we said you have to do is just come to the geometry tab this time. What we've been doing for the last week is all the way down. In this area right here where you have types of angles. So what I'm going to say is today's assignment is just going to be to go over acute, right, obtuse, straight, reflex, and full rotation. So we talked about this on the first day that we came to this section where acute is less than 90, right angles are 90, obtuse is bigger than 90. So the angle, typically when you're labeling the angle, it's the inside in between these two lines. So the straight line is the 180 degrees, like we said. The reflex is now the outside angle. So it's not this part that's inside that we would have called obtuse. And then the full rotation is the 360 degrees. So to finish this conversation, we started with this, but we skipped over all of these quizzes. So what I'm going to say is this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is like an hour, if you're saying one question per minute, of quizzes. So if you do just this today, that's a lot. They're not so difficult because it's just about, this is, let me click on acute. So because we've already been talking about the vocabulary, an acute angle is less than 90 degrees. So now what you have to do is just study the vocabulary words, and you can say acute is small, like when people say like they go to the doctor and they have an acute, sickness or illness, it's not the same as a large one. You could also say, oh, it's cute and that's small, whatever you want to say, so that you remember that acute is the tinier one. They also have it up here, like the letter A, saying that it's going to be that kind of angle that's tighter than the 90 degrees. So when you get down to this, it's not that much information really. When you click on question number 1, it's saying which of the following angles is not acute. So now you're looking for the one that is not less than 90 degrees, right? So it's going to be this one that's 91. So I don't think that these questions are so difficult that they even are going to take you a minute for each question, because it's just really the vocabulary words. But what I'm saying is we want to wrap up our conversation about angles. So try them all out today. If you, for some reason, you need more time, of course, you can still do them tomorrow or another day. We did these already, and hopefully you're getting the text messages of which two we're trying to work on at any one time. But today, we're going to come back up to the top. So starting with Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to be in this category that is plane geometry. So we're going to start finally talking about shapes. So this is all in this section with the red subtitle. So plane geometry is a flat surface, and that's what we're going to match up with Khan Academy and Aztec. So where we're going to start is with area and perimeter, just an overview of the conversation. And then starting tomorrow, we're actually going to start picking a different shape every day and working towards learning the formulas. So another thing that I think is a good idea to do is to go to your Gmail account like we were doing in class. You can go to documents if you want and hit start a new document. And you can just keep track of all of the formulas. So we're going to start out with square and rectangle. So you can do the same thing that we were doing in class. If you want to keep digital notes, you can. So even if you're taking handwritten notes, you might want to keep the digital just to be able to see everything in one spot. Do both as like part of your studying. Of course, it's completely up to you, but this is the section that we're starting in, and I'm going to start with perimeter, which I feel like we know from just the vocabulary. Perimeter is the distance around a two-dimensional shape. So perimeter is basically the line of the shape. If you look at this example, it's a rectangle, and it's got 7 as the length, or the top and the bottom, and 3 as the left and the right, or the width. So what you do when you find perimeter is basically just add around all the sides of a shape. What I normally try to do, because sometimes shapes can get more involved, is just start at 12 o'clock. So kind of like we said when we're looking at photos or maps, if you always start in the same spot, you'll be able to know where you begin and where you need to leave off. So here I would say, like they did, 7 plus 3 plus 7 plus 3, and go clockwise so that I know that I didn't miss anything. And for a rectangle or a triangle or a square, it may seem kind of easy, but as you get to other shapes like the pentagon, you don't want to double count. You don't want to add an extra 3 for some reason, because you just are not picking the right spot. So we're just going to talk about these polygons, which are the shapes with lines so far. But this Math is Fun page does also start to talk about a circle. We're going to talk about a circle separately. But this is saying, which I think we've marked some of the spots of the circle, but the center of the circle, from the center to the outside line of the circle is the radius. The entire outside line of the circle is the circumference. So they don't call the outside line of a circle a perimeter because of what the word perimeter means. So perimeter is a breakdown of peri and meter, which are lines. So there are no lines, no straight lines in a circle. So instead of calling it perimeter, they call it circumference, but it really just still means the same thing in that it means the outside line of the shape. So this is the formula for the circumference of a circle, which is 2 times pi times the radius, which we're going to come back to when we really talk about a circle. The rest of these shapes, these are going to be the ones that we go through over the course of this week and next week. So we're just going to keep picking different shapes every day and then move towards the 3-dimensional shapes. So like we said when we first were talking about lines, you have the dot. And when you have 2 dots, you get 1 line. And then when you get 3 lines, you now have a connected shape. So this is the triangle. So we're just looking at the formulas right now. We're going to keep studying them through Khan Academy and Aztec, but you can see that we're trying to read the formula to understand what it's saying. Like when we looked at expressions and when we looked at equations, what this is it's an equation. It's saying the perimeter equals A plus B plus C. And a lot of times when you see a triangle, you're going to see reference to an A, a B, and a C because there are 3 sides. So A is 1, B is 1, and C is 1. When you're looking at a square, you're going to see the perimeter is 4 times A. So because the rule of a square is that all sides are the same length, they're only showing you 1 length. They're not necessarily saying A, B, C, D because it's not 4 different lengths. So here it's just saying if you know one side of the square, then you know the perimeter because you know that a square has 4 sides. So you're going to say 4 times whatever the one side you know is. Then just like the one that we just looked at the introduction of this page, perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the width plus the height. So sometimes people say it's 2 times the width and the height. It's different ways that it could be worded, but this is basically saying if you know 1 width and 1 height, you're going to double that for the other 2 sides of the rectangle. And here we also see in some formulas that they say length and height for rectangle. So Math is Fun, like we said before, is an international website, and they are saying width and height, but a lot of times it will say length and height for a rectangle. Here we have a quadrilateral, which quad is just 4, and lateral, we have 4 lats, 4 sides, but these are not equal like in a rectangle. So it's back to being kind of like the triangle, A plus B plus C plus D, and that you have 4 different sides that you're adding up. Then we have circle, sector, and ellipse, which we are going to get to towards the end. So the circle we kind of mentioned, the sector is a slice of that, and then the ellipse is this kind of oval shape that has a different formula. So when you come down here, it says your turn, you're hitting question number 1. It says, what is the perimeter of the rectangle? So all you're doing is seeing again that it's not going to be labeled for everything. So you have to know that the word perimeter means add up all of the sides. Which is pretty straightforward. But like this is an example of when you get to something that is a unique shape, it says, what is the perimeter of the cross? This is where I think it pays to start at 12 o'clock. Because what you want to say is 10, you want to count this line too. So you're thinking of tracing the symbol or putting up, you know, painting like a picture frame, anything that's really the outside of the symbol. So you've got 10 here, 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 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, right? So sometimes you can lose track of that if you are not going in some kind of an order. So you want to make sure that you think of the order for yourself and always do the same thing. Because again, you might only see 1 or 2 problems like this on your actual test, but it really is easy. Perimeter is just adding. So here's another one. And here you have one. It says the diagram shows a rectangle and a square. If they have equal perimeters, what is the length of one side of the square? So now this is where it is more involved. First, you have to say they both have the same perimeter. So you can figure out the perimeter of this square by figuring out the perimeter of the rectangle. So if you have 7 and 7 and 3 and 3, you now have the total. Now when you have the total, you have to apply the rule of a square, which means divide that total by 4. So if you have any questions, don't forget to write down your questions. But then you have, you know, different shapes. When you get to one like this, it says, what is the perimeter of rectangle A, B, C, D? What you want to do is you want to count the grid that's in the back. So when you're trying to count from here to here, or let's say you're going to count from A to B, point A to point B, there are no numbers on the outside of the shape to tell you how long this line is from A to B. So you have to count the grids in the back. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Then you're going to count over here. So this just happens to be a shape that's on top of the quadrants. So you're counting, you could also count the line that it goes from a +3 up here on the Y axis to a -3. So that would also be 6, right? Because we're going to go from 3 to 0 as 3, and then from 0 to the -3 as another 3. So the total length of the line would actually be 6. So you have a choice. You just count the boxes, or you can really use the lines and go from a 3 to a -2. So from line B to from point B to point C would be 3 that are positive, right? From 3 to 0 would be 3 spaces, and from 0 to -2 would be 2 more spaces. So that means when you count here, this should be 5. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is an example. This is the quiz that we're going to do today. I'm just going through a couple of them that I think might be different, but you want to say that you recognize the grid on the back in one like this where there are no numbers. And you want to recognize one like this. This is an octagon, like a stop sign, where everything is equal. So when they only label 1, you're saying, I know an octagon has 8, so I'm saying 8 times 7. Or you can just do the adding, 7 plus 7 plus 7. Oh, let me go clockwise. 7 plus 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 7. So you just want to make sure that you start in the same position so that you don't overlap for any reason and you don't lose track. So this is the perimeter page. That's just an overview and gives a couple of formulas. The other page is right underneath of that, which is area. And it goes about the definition first. Area is the size of a surface. So instead of just the outside line, it's actually how much space is taken up by the whole shape on the inside. So these are all examples that have the same area of 9. This one is a row of 1, but they have 9 blocks. So that's 1 times 9 is 9. This one is a square where there's 3 across and 3 down. So 3 times 3 is 9. And this one is a composite shape, which basically just means there's kind of like 2 shapes. There's this one rectangle and then there's another rectangle. But if you count every square, it still goes up to 9. So this is another thing to help you remember the definition. Area is how much paint it would take to cover the shape. So instead of just like we were doing with perimeter, where we're just talking about this outside blue line, they're now painting the whole shape with the blue paint. So this formula now is to just multiply, because you're thinking of all of the rows or the unit spaces in between the shape. So here the formula for a rectangle is area equals length times width. If this has a length of, or this is saying width times height, if this has a width of 5 and a height of 3, the area of this shape is going to be 15. Coming down a little bit more, you can do the same thing, count what's on the grid, but that does take longer, which is why you come up with formulas, because it's going to be easier. But if you do have a grid in the background, you can count how many literal spots there are. So this would be one row of 5, a second row of 5, and a third row of 5. That's what the 5 times 3 is actually doing. Coming down a little bit more, they say that you can estimate or get an approximate area if it's on a grid by counting the blocks, but then saying this one right here is not a full block, so I'm not going to count it. This one I'm going to count it because I'm kind of borrowing from this one right here and this third one over here. So what they're saying is you can skip a couple to fill in the spots where there is not a full block taken up, so that again you're just kind of doing an estimate, and it says approximately 17 units for that shape. Coming down a little bit more, we're going to keep going over these. The area for a circle is pi, which we're going to talk about in a couple of days, times r, which is the radius, squared. And then you're just using this like an equation. If it asks you about the area, you're going to replace pi with 3.1416, or using your calculator, use the pi symbol or pi button. And then the radius on this one was 2.1. So now you're doing the order of operations. You're putting the 2.1 in parentheses and squaring it. And then you're going to say 2.1 times 2.1 and then times 3.146. So it's building on what we already did with algebra. Here, we're also going to do this probably Monday, but when you have difficult shapes, what you're really doing is you're going to combine two formulas. So you're going to combine the fact that you're doing the area of this square first, which is 20 by 20, and then you're going to add it to the area of a triangle. So this is where we're going to build to by the end of next week, is shapes that are really made up of more than one shape. And it's going over other shapes, but we're not going to necessarily do those. So I'm just introducing area and perimeter today. You really can do the perimeter quiz today on Math is Fun, and I'll text that to you when we're done. The other thing that you can do is go into Aztec, and I'm going to borrow somebody's code. Let's see. So if you go into let me just borrow Elise real quick. So I'm going to go into hers just to show you where it is. So if you have Aztec, you can go into Task, go to your learning plan, come down to Math, and we already did some things in numbers. We did some things in data and statistics. We did the expressions which don't have equal signs. We did a little bit of equations and inequalities. So now this is the section that we kind of skipped over in Aztec, geometric measurement and modeling. If you click on that, where we just were is really geometric properties and operations, where we're going to talk about the basics of square, rectangle, circle, triangle. And we're skipping over Pythagorean theorem right now. We're going to do that when we actually go over triangles in a couple days. So if you wanted to keep going and get another lesson that's building off of area and perimeter, you're going to come to this section here. It is a little bit different because you might see some things about circle already, but you do have the lessons when you click here. So that'll just make it easier when we do circle together. So this is one thing that you can do if you want to keep in the same topic. I also loaded in to Khan Academy, there's a lesson for perimeter. And these are going to be kind of easy again because it's the foundation. So it's changing the order a little bit. So it says intro to area and unit squares. That's going over what we just saw in Math is Fun, like really just looking at the squares behind the shape and counting what it is. And then it's building up to making shapes and then perimeter introduction. So you can also do these to stay within the same category. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen and then we can answer any questions because that was kind of a lot. I'm going to just stop the recording real quick. Or, well, does anybody have any questions? Actually, let me unmute everyone. If you want to put your question in for the group who's not here, you can, in case they have the same question. Any questions? I see something. Okay, so this question is going back to complementary angles and supplementary angles. I think the way that they listed it in Math is Fun, how do you remember the difference between complementary and supplementary is, let's see, let me go back and share this screen. And maybe just saying like, if before the class that we come on and do together, you can just spend like 5 minutes doing the vocabulary. That's really important because when we're saying that you're going to take this test, you're obviously, if you're doing the test in Mercer, you'll be taking the test in May or June, right? So we're studying in March, but you have to be able to remember the vocabulary. So what I think is a good way is saying this little thing that they said down here, that C is for corner, and because of corner, you're thinking of a right angle, and that's 90 degrees. So I think most people do know that the right angle is 90 degrees and the straight line is 1. I would go with this little yellow box that they have. C is complementary and corner and 90. S is supplementary and straight. And just say that a couple of times to myself, or write it down a couple of times, or do both. But that's the way that I would remember is, and you only have to remember one of them, right? Because by default, the other one is the other thing. So if you just like C is corner and 90, then if you see supplementary on your instructions, it's gotta be the 180. So a lot of times when we're trying to memorize everything, you don't have to memorize everything. You just have to remember something that's like a trigger and will knock over multiple dominoes, right? And again, you're probably only gonna get this question once, if you get it, but it's super easy because you're just adding up to 90 or adding up to 180. So you don't want to get it wrong, is what I'm saying. Just because of a vocabulary word. So taking 5 minutes, because this is going to be a lot of vocabulary. We did a lot of angles this week. So you have to remember acute, 90, or a right angle, obtuse, because that's what's in your vocabulary. When you get a question and it says, which one of these is the acute angle? It's not a difficult question, but it's that you have thousands of vocabulary words in your mind from studying that you can get mixed up. So you want to say to yourself that you spend a couple of minutes doing that, because there's always those questions that are at the freshman level, where it's just a matter of, can I understand what they're even asking? And then some of the questions on your test are meant to be 1 minute or less. You just know it and you move on. Like I'm sure you've seen, if you've taken another subject like social studies or writing, you're supposed to say, okay, there's a comma missing and I fixed it and I'm moving on. That's the way that you can do 50 questions in 70 minutes, right? Some of them have to be on the easier side. And those are the ones that you want to get right off the bat. Like we said before, some of them are going to be at the more difficult side where you're going to have to guess. And then you want to invest your time in the ones that are in the middle, really, where you are figuring on paper or using the calculator. So does anybody have another question? All right, so then this is kind of like a new lesson again. Eventually, we're going to have the right rhythm. So we kind of are wrapping up angles. You can do any of those, which I'm going to text you when we hang up. You can do any of those today, like acute, right, obtuse, reflex, rotation. But inside of Khan Academy now is the perimeter and area. So what we want to do is we're going to combine this information. Like we said yesterday, the internal angles of a triangle come out to be 180 degrees because it's going to make a flat line. The internal angles of a square are going to come out to be 360 degrees. So we're going to combine that information about angles with the different shapes and perimeter and area to try to master the shapes. So one thing you can do on either note cards, your notebook, or Google Docs is just say, this one page or this one note card is going to be about squares. So what are all the things I know about a square? I'm going to draw a square, and I'll show you this tomorrow in the class. I'll get my drawing skills together. But you want to say, that way you know everything about a square. So that might be the internal angles are 360 degrees. Every side is the same length. Every, corner is 90 degrees inside, right? So everything that you know, you want to label so that when you see those geometry questions pop up, you'll be able to answer multiple questions about a square or multiple questions about the triangle. And that's what we're going to aim for. I'm going to say we're just introducing it now. So at least like 2 weeks, we're going to be doing this, So we're starting out with all the flat shapes, and then we'll move to the 3-dimensional shapes. So if you have a question after you try the quiz, just send me a text message. If you think of something, let me stop recording.